Thank you, Treat NMD, for inviting me to speak and for allowing me to tell my daughter Mila's story. Before I begin, I would love for you to watch a short video just to get to know Mila. As you can see, Mila was a very healthy, typical child when she was born. She was very outgoing, she was very talkative. She would hike and bike and ski, when she was 2 years old. But around 3.5, she started having some strange symptoms. She started falling a lot, and she was covered in bruises. She would pull her toys and her books in very close. And she started stuttering in a very unusual way and getting stuck on her words. And each of these doctors told me I was kind of crazy and that she would grow out of these symptoms. By 3.5, 4, I had started taking her around the country to different doctors. And by the time that she was 6, she had been to about 100 appointments with doctors and therapists. And no one could figure out what was going on with her, and I gave up. And I brought her into the ER at Children's Hospital, Colorado. She spent a week there, and after a week of tests, she was diagnosed with Batten disease. And I have to be honest, my first initial reaction was, there's an answer to everything that I've been seeing. However, it took me minutes to read about Batten disease to realize it was one of the worst diagnoses I could have ever received. I thought my daughter was losing her vision because she had an eye problem, but instead I was being told that she would lose all of her abilities and she would die in the next few years. I started a foundation like many other rare disease parents. I had no idea what to do. I was desperate. I started reading scientific papers. I started telling Mila's story and raising money. And the only option at that time was a gene therapy, which was an incredible long shot, but it didn't require knowing a lot about the disease, and there was very little known. Along the way, however, I realized that Mila had actually received a half diagnosis. Only one of her 2 mutations had been found, and Batten disease is autosomal recessive, so it required 2. And my son at the time was very young, and he didn't have any symptoms, and nor had Mila. So I needed to be able to test him, and to do that properly, I needed to have both mutations. And I also wanted to make sure if I were going after a treatment, a gene replacement therapy, that it was for the right disease and for the right gene. So I was on a mission to find a missing mutation, and my quest for that turned into a Facebook post trying to ask if anyone could help me get into a lab at Harvard that offered whole genome sequencing, which was very rare at the time. This put me in touch with Dr. Timothy Yu at Boston Children's Hospital, which I was very, very fortunate to meet him and his team, as they decided they wanted to help me, and they set out on a mission to find Mila's very difficult to find mutation. After just a short few months, they were able to find this missing mutation, which was a deep intronic mutation. Most labs probably would have never been able to even associate that with the disease itself, but they were able to show in lab studies that it was in fact the disease-causing mutation. And what was unusual about it was that Mila was the only person in the world that had that mutation. And while rare disease, in general, each person that has a mutation inherently is a very small group of people. In Mila's case, no one else could be found. Spinraza was a drug that was approved around that exact same time, within weeks of this. And it showed to halt, in many cases, an incredibly horrible disease, spinal muscular atrophy. And that was on everyone's mind at the time. And Mila's mutation seemed to offer the possibility for a kind of Spinraza-like approach for Mila. But what was different was because she was just one. Dr. Yu and his team spent the following year working tirelessly with hundreds of people in order to see whether they could create a Milasen-like drug for Mila. Just 1 year after meeting Dr. Yu, we moved to Boston, and Mila began receiving a drug called Milasen, which was named after her. I think only in that moment when Mila began receiving this medicine did I realize what a big deal this was. Not only was my daughter receiving a genetic treatment when I was told that was going to be 10 years away and that was impossible, but that this drug was tailored to her mutation. And I think I started realizing in that moment, together with Dr. Yu and many others, what potential effect this might have on rare disease as a possible solution. You know, in the first year of Mila being treated, I have to be honest, I was shocked because Mila had been spiraling downhill. She had lost her vision, she had lost her last words, she was losing her last ability to put anything in her mouth and was being fed by a G-tube. She was stumbling and weak, and she was not really able to stand very well. And when Mila began receiving Milasen, she started sitting up stronger. She started holding her body up. She was able to lift her feet and take more steps with my support from behind. Prior to Milasen, she had kind of not been laughing and smiling as much as, and suddenly now, you know, the stories and the books and the things that used to, the certain times in the stories when people would sneeze, you know, or cry, she thought that was hilarious and would start laughing. And she hadn't been doing that as much before. And after Milasen, I started noticing kind of her light and her laughter and her smile come back, which was probably the most significant thing as a mother to see. She had started having really serious seizures just months before. They were lasting up to 3 minutes sometimes, and there were many of them a day, 20, 30 of them a day. After Milasen, within a pretty short period of time, you know, she was down to a handful or one or two, and they were so minor that you couldn't even see them anymore. She started eating by mouth again, pureed foods, but that was, you know, quality of life was increased, you know, and for a child that was at a very late stage of her disease, this was pretty shocking to me. It was pretty promising. However, I had been told ahead of time by Dr. Yu and his team that, you know, some of the dominoes had already fallen and that we wouldn't be in time to stop them. And perhaps some of them we would be in time. And so I saw Mila have incredible stability for the first year, but in the second year, it was hard for me to tell whether or not we had stopped the disease or not, and I saw some good things and some not so good things. In the third year, it was very clear to me that Mila's disease was progressing. It was progressing very slowly, but that Mila was in a place that I had never wanted her to be. She was unable to take a fly off of her nose and able to move her arms and move her body. She wasn't able to make the noises and sounds that she used to be able to make. And I was faced with very excruciatingly difficult decisions that no parent should ever have to make. And last year, February of last year, Mila's very big, beautiful spirit left her small body. And I, like many other rare disease parents, am forced to live every day of my life missing her, trying to find ways to connect with her, and realizing that, you know, her story is offering a lot of hope for other children, and that's why I'm here today. It's why I continue pushing and fighting in this world of rare disease. Mila's medicine was not in time for her, but it did show what was possible, and what's now possible, which is that a drug can be tailored to one individual person. It can be tailored to the underlying genetic cause. In the case of Mila, it was a single mutation, and no one else in the world shared it. And so, you know, when I go to sleep at night, I think there's hundreds of millions of people with rare disease. 60 million of those are children that will die before the age of 5 from a rare disease. Most of those are genetic. Going gene by gene, which is what we're doing now, and it's amazing that we even have that opportunity to do that, but it's not going to cut it. It's going to take thousands of years to cure all of these diseases. And I look at the approach that was taken for Mila, which was an individualized medicine approach. It happened to be an antisense oligonucleotide, which was the modality, but there are many other modalities like antisense oligonucleotides or ASOs that are programmable, like Milasen was. And they offer a potentially very impactful solution to what feels to me like a global health crisis, you know, of rare disease, especially in children. And so I think about Mila, and then I think about potentially the millions of people who could benefit from an individualized medicine approach. And I think, how are we going to get from Mila to millions? The problem is that our current system is not equipped for this paradigm. It's equipped for one drug for tens or hundreds of thousands of people, not tens or hundreds of thousands of drugs, each for 1 or 2 or 6 people. And that, is the future. We've been speaking about precision medicine for a long time, much earlier than I entered in the world of rare disease. And now we've seen that it's possible. However, the system is not equipped, not just the regulatory path, but the incentives for companies and for academics, and the manufacturing and the animal studies. None of that is appropriate for this new paradigm. And so it's forcing everyone to now rethink each of these aspects in the drug development process and really think, how do we get from Mila to millions? There are many barriers, of which there are people all over the world who are rethinking this and trying to address each of these barriers. But one of them in particular comes to mind, and it's really important, which is the sharing of knowledge, of data, of experience, of processes, of pricing. This is how Millicin was created. Millicin was created on an enormous collaboration. Dr. Yu and his team worked with hundreds of people across many academic institutions and companies across countries. I myself, trying to raise the money and awareness, worked with thousands of people all over the world to raise the money and to tell Mila's story. Collaboration was needed to make Millicin happen, and enormous collaboration is going to be needed to get from Mila to millions. One of the ways that Dr. Yu and I, together with many others, including Anamika, who plays a big role, obviously, in this group, we have created the N of One Collaborative. The N of One Collaborative is an international kind of neutral hub to rethink each of the aspects of drug development for individualized medicines. The mission is to make individualized medicines routine worldwide. That they're happening in large numbers at every institution, around the world. And one of the things that we are most concentrated on is on sharing. We are creating a database where every PI that's working on a treatment like Millicin can share the data. I think every parent whose child is treated needs to know that they offer an enormous opportunity and responsibility to share their child's data, preclinical, clinical. They have the right to say, I want my data shared. In fact, I have that right, and Mila's data will be the first data that is put into this database. The sharing of pricing, processes, knowledge, experience as well comes not just from academics, but it comes from companies as well. And it's really important that every company in this space decides what is pre-competitive as much as possible and make sure that that data is included in this database as well, and that our work groups within the N of One Collaborative that are talking about outcome measures and how to design a trial, and they're talking about how to get an institution on board to allow for a treatment like Millicin, and the safety and what are the correct safety studies that have to be done. All of these require people from academics, families, companies, regulators sitting at the table and really kind of rethinking, how do we do this? Because it is not the way that we've ever developed drugs, but it is the future, and it offers enormous hope in rare disease. So I encourage everyone who is excited about this opportunity to make sure that they are sharing everything they possibly can, because I believe that in order to completely change the drug development system is not going to happen easily, and it's not going to happen overnight, but it could happen if everyone gets together and shares that information and that knowledge. And I envision a future, I hope not too far away, where children like Mila are diagnosed significantly earlier, and that within just a few months, a few $100,000 covered by insurance, that child receives a genetic treatment that is tailored to their underlying condition, whether they be just 1 or 6 or 12, the number doesn't really matter. It matters that genetic treatments that are actually targeting the cause are able to be made, and they are accessible. And so thank you for listening to this story of my daughter, Mila, and just encourage all parents to keep fighting, and encourage all the academics to keep pushing, and encourage the companies to, keep sharing. And together, I hope that there'll be a near future where individualized medicine is just routine, and it's part of how we treat rare disease, and that offers enormous hope for children like Mila. Thank you.